Hi, this is Scott Balaboni from the Fuse Board of Directors, the Fuse Working Group co-director. I just want to thank everybody for joining Fuse's webinar Wednesday for May of 2018. We appreciate that you've taken the time out of your day to listen to a little bit about what's going on within some of our working groups, as well as some of the activities that are occurring within the Fuse community. So I'm just going to give a really quick update about some of those activities and then cede the floor to the more important presentations, if you will. So for those of you who are interested or are going to the US Connect, we will be looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. We actually were able to sell out the event, and congratulations to the co-chairs of the event for doing a lot of hard work putting this first annual US Connect together and then getting the event to sell out. We have 130 presentations from industry, from regulators, from technology providers, so we're looking forward to a really exciting and engaging conference. There is a photo competition, as I understand it, so if you happen to either tweet or post pictures from the conference on Instagram and tag them with Fuse photo, there will be some sort of exciting outcome to that hashtagging affair. So again, for those of you going to Connect, we're really looking forward to seeing you in lovely Raleigh, North Carolina in less than 2 weeks. If you were unable to make the Raleigh Connect event, we are hosting our annual EU Connect event in Frankfurt, Germany. Our call for papers actually closed for that event with over 250 abstracts for approximately 130 to 150 slots. So again, a great response from the Fuse community and a lot of interest in both attending and sharing your ideas at the Frankfurt EU Connect. The early bird registration for the Frankfurt Connect closes on July 27th. So as you see, the US Connect has sold out. Traditionally, our EU Connects sell out as well. So it's a great time for you to register early at a bit of a reduced rate. There are still some rooms available in the conference hotel. So again, if you're thinking about going to the Frankfurt Connect, we would encourage you to register now and book your rooms at the conference hotels. Given the success of our first annual US Connect, we're going to make this a recurring event, and we're coming to Baltimore, Maryland next year. So moving a little bit further north, Baltimore is a lovely city, so there's going to be more information after the US Connect in Raleigh about the Baltimore event. So stay tuned to these webinars, stay tuned to either the Fuse Twitter, the Fuse website. There's a lot of ways to consume information about all that's happening within the Fuse community, but we're excited to officially announce our second annual US Connect event and be hosting that in Baltimore, Maryland. We are hosting some single day events. It's a great way to come and share ideas with your colleagues. There are some events that are occurring in Europe in June, one in Copenhagen and one in Basel, Switzerland. The Fuse annual report was published. It is downloadable from the Fuse website. It's a great way, again, to kind of see a cumulative view into the Fuse organization and what's going on within the organization, as well as then to get a little bit of granularity around some of the working group activities, some of the single day events that occurred. And again, it's a great way for those of you who may be new to the Fuse community to kind of get an overview of some of the activities that are occurring within the community. As I mentioned, there's plenty of opportunities to stay engaged with Fuse and to get information about what's occurring within the Fuse community. We are going green here at Fuse. Our newsletter that we had been distributing both on paper and electronically is now going to be electronic only. There's great opportunities to follow Fuse on social media if you happen to be social media savvy. And again, the US Connect in Raleigh, if you are attending the event, we would encourage you to post on social media and get the word out about the interesting presentations that are occurring, some of the other more fun festivities, not to imply that presentations aren't fun, but there's other activities going on as well. Use the hashtag US Connect 18 if you're going in less than 2 weeks. We will be having another webinar in June, really focused on some of the activities that are going on, that are more closely related to the FDA, and we would encourage you to attend those webinars as well. So with that sort of business out of the way, I just want to kind of get through one more piece of housekeeping, and then I'll turn the floor over to, again, the more important presentations. If you have questions for the presenters, we will answer the questions at the end. Just please feel free to type them into either the GoToWebinar question functionality or the GoToWebinar chat functionality, and we will address those at the end of the session, time permitting. So again, I want to thank you for your time today. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jeff Lowe to provide some clarity around an emerging trends and technology project. Jeff, do you happen to be on mute?
There we
go.
Hi, my name's Jeff Lowe. I'm the co-chair of the Emerging Trends Technologies Group, but I'm speaking more in this particular presentation about the project that I co-led a couple of years ago, which was fixing the alternative transport format group. So I'm going to talk sort of a wee bit about what the project was and sort of the conclusions that came out of it. This is sort of partly in response to some of what have been drawn as conclusions off the work of the paper itself, which I think are a wee bit misrepresentative of some of the conclusions we came to. But firstly, why did this project exist? This was obviously the second project intended to address this one. There was one in 2012. Where the FDA actually had everybody come to a meeting and look at ways to replace the SAS transport file. The problem with the SAS transport file is, well, to be honest, it's of its time. It was sort of created around 30 years ago, and it reflected the paradigms that existed then. So it's limited to just tabular-based data structures with fixed width columns. You're only allowed numeric and character types. You're only allowed to use single byte characters. That's what the format only supports it. It's quite inefficient as to how it uses the space. You end up with like inflation of the data sets themselves. Couple that with the fact that there's actually a file size limit of 5 gigabytes, means that a lot of people are having to split their data sets up and set them in parts. And it has no metadata, or metadata as we would consider it. Column labels is not the sort of thing we would consider to be really useful. So the methodology for the project was intended to be broken up into two parts. The first one was to look at, okay, if we were to wipe the slate clean and come up with a transport format, what sort of characteristics would that transport format have? So to do that, we got together a group of people right across the industry. Obviously, I'm from the technology side. We had people who were statisticians. We had representations from other vendors. We had data managers. We actually had some people from IT at the FDA at one point. And what we did was we got together and put together a series of like definitions and test cases that we could do to quantify characteristics of a transport format that would make sense for the less about the world as we see it now, but more about the world as we see it to be. Once we'd gathered together that set of requirements, we prepared a questionnaire. We sent it out for review by the industry, because we can put together all these characteristics, but we need to be able to quantify them, or basically categorize them as needed or not needed or nice to haves, because the intention was for phase 2 of this project was to actually do a battle of the titans, if you will, taking all these different categories, all these different criteria, running through a sample data set using there were a number of different sample data sets using these particular criteria to score them, and then come up with like a recommendation to say that this format is good for this particular, covering these characteristics, etc. So we wanted to make sure we had sort of a good coverage of people who had the experience and the ability to do this. So some of the example criteria we came up with were, I'm just going to jot through these because I think it's quite important, because I think a lot of this gets lost. But I think the paper in of itself was really interesting because we, like I said, we didn't stick to what we knew. We stick to what we thought could be important in the future. So obviously the first thing for a lot of people is the ability to support data as captured. So the ability to capture characters encoded not using, for example, US ASCII, to be able to capture data as it is or as it was. Actually support natively a wider range of data types. So don't spend a lot of time turning a date string into or turning a date into a date string. So you have to pack it and unpack it and everything like that. Why can't you just natively support the data as it is? Self-describing in terms of basically packaging together the data and the metadata in one file format. So then the data itself is much more encapsulated, much more actionable without thinking too much about it. Having some way of expressing data provenance, where the data came from, where it went to. Much of this is covered by define.xml, for example, but the thing is, why do we need another format on top of the existing transport format to kind of fill in those gaps? Being able to express relationships between the data entries. We know that the world that we live in is not, strictly speaking, two-dimensional, row by column. There are relationships between the data, and a lot of the stuff that we're having to do in the data sets themselves is just down to the machinations required to get it into this row by column format. So the ability to be able to represent the relationships between these data elements and entries would obviously cut down the amount of work that we have to put in to actually just get this stuff in a place where we can move it around. And obviously be able to represent data using relationships rather than like copying all the time would shrink the size of the data sets, as an example. Being able to encrypt the data set itself and actually digitally sign it off. So when you're doing a submission, you could sign it off as a pharma company, and then the receiving agency could then look at the signature and verify that the data was actually sourced from your company, as an example. Some way of identifying whether or not data changed built into the format. So if we have transport issues, if we have bits flipped and everything like that, have some way of recognizing that and being able to maybe request a new copy or anything like that. Support validating the actual content itself. So actually having behind the scenes some sort of schema which describes the data structures therein, and people would be able to write tools around them. So sort of formatting errors we picked up at the source. Be able to support compression natively. So getting rid of a lot of that wasted space, if at all possible, if there's text content, being able to compress that down. The ability to partition the data sets themselves. So rather than actually having to send all of the data in at one go, you could send, for example, a single subject's worth of data, and then have the data format itself represent that encapsulation. So it could declare that this is for a single subject as part of a study, as part of a submission. The support for null flavors. So null flavors are a concept that are used in healthcare, which kind of de-ambiguate the missing data. So it says it would, rather than just having an empty string and you don't know the reason why, actually be able to declare why there is no data there, for example. And then also being able to support a much wider range of data in the submission package itself. Again, it sort of relates to the fact that we're just sending in rows by columns, but we can imagine in the future we're going to be able to send, we're going to need to be able to send around images, we're going to need to be able to send around sort of binary encoded data, for example. We need to have some way of encapsulating that in the data set if it's relevant to it. And these ones are what I call the obviously, we need to support wider columns, we need to support longer labels, and we need to be able to work with the existing tools. These were included in the set of requirements that we came up with. So once we put all that together, we sent out a questionnaire. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, because we certainly did publicize it quite a bit, We used both the Fuse and the CDIS mailing list, so we had good coverage, I think. We still got a very small response rate, so only 210 responses, which is quite disappointing. But I think it actually indicates something, which I'll come up and talk about in the future. So just to indicate the experience or the sort of the industry knowledge or industry domain of the respondents. Obviously, this top left-hand corner, we have the percentage of respondents by the industry body. The responses are dominated by pharma and CRO. Quite a small regulatory aspect there, but I mean, we got a good sort of a broad range. We just didn't get enough to really be able to assign any significance to the conclusions. And in terms of what people had experience with, we had sort of a good range in terms of the SAS. A lot of people were actually using the SAS transport file, so they're aware of the issues themselves. So based on sort of the top 12 or thereabouts, the top 12 features that people thought would be useful, or issues that needed to be fixed right now. File size is obviously number one. Compression, the ability to compress it, encryption and digital signature, that they both come together, I think is really interesting. The data integrity, being able to know what's going on when you're moving files around. Excuse me. Having a schema-driven data model representation is very useful for people, because then once you have a schema, you can start building tools around that. The transport format metadata, being able to express what the data is actually within the file itself, rather than actually having to rely on something else coming in. Obviously, the open standard is a must-have for everybody. It was being able to support the native content as entered using multi-byte character encoding, using more discrete data type definitions, being able to refer to things as dates and times, for example, null flavor support, and then extensibility was kind of interesting insofar as so people know the ODM pretty well. One of the great features of the ODM is it can be extended using like vendor extensions, for example. So you can declare things which are relevant to your domain, but perhaps not relevant to other domains. But you can do that without having to produce a file that only works with your system itself. So I think that was pretty interesting for people. So we published the white paper in 2017. It's been out there for a while. This is a statement I pulled from the paper, which I think it sort of reflects back to the response rate itself. Like I said, I was quite disappointed, to say the least, about the response rate, because I did think this is something that it seems like it's going to hold us back, if not now, certainly in the future. But I suppose it comes down to the old adage, if you can't get them with the carrot. So this is effectively what we were saying here. We came up with a series of carrots, and that wasn't enough to get people off the bench. We need the stick, I think, for something so dramatic as this. We need it to come from the top. It needs to be people who are going to be receiving the files, people who are going to be generating the files, need to actually have sufficient motivation to actually move it forward, because otherwise it's not going to happen under its own, and we're going to continue to move data around in antiquated data formats. And sort of as a mea culpa, the paper did come up with a recommendation for the transition to SAS Transport 8, but it wasn't intended as a ringing endorsement. Like I said, it covers the topics, or addresses the topics covered under the well data section. They're not actually giving you any more power. They're just saying you can put more stuff in there, which I don't think is really the big problem we're running into, or it should be the problem with it. We're running into, and it doesn't make the issues around the file size, which is obviously the most significant concern for the respondents, any worse. It certainly doesn't make them any better, but it doesn't make them any worse. So it was never kind of intended as a ringing endorsement for SAS Transport V8. It was kind of an iterative thing rather than what we would have really liked to do. And just to be honest, I mean, we recognize the world itself is much more complex than necessarily can be represented in rows by columns. So some of the groups out there are starting to develop models which are more sort of reflective of the world as it is, through linked data as an example, or being able to actually sort of discretely assign relationships and also annotate the relationships between the data sets themselves, because that's much more reflective of the world as it is. We've seen a lot more studies published now about moving away from, for example, the randomized controlled trial, moving more towards evidence-based medicine, where you need to be able to incorporate data from sort of very diverse sets of data from EHR systems, for example. And there's just sort of packaging all that data into, which is quite rich, into a row by column transport file with restricted widths and everything like that, seems like such a waste. So Fuse is doing its part in terms of looking at ways to move certainly the discussion forward. So we obviously have the clinical trials data as RDF, which is very active and really moving ahead in a great direction, I think. And also a project it's relatively new, but the ODM for Submissions project under the tutelage of Sam Hume, for example, is a great idea, because it takes, so obviously there is the dataset XML that was used as part of the 2012 project. The dataset XML was supported by SAS, for example, but it never really got any carry because it was never declared against what it would be evaluated. And so it just came out and they said the files were much larger, but it's one of those sort of, it wasn't really a probative outcome. So they're looking again at how can they effectively build on a bunch of these criteria to be able to say, okay, let's look at the future. Let's see how we're going to be moving data, or how we need to be able to move data around. And the ODM itself is a like I said, a great utilitarian approach to do that. But what we actually need is, again, this is not something that's going to happen under its own steam. We need organizations themselves that are capable of recognizing that we need to embrace new ways of utilizing data, more diverse data, more highly dimensional data, data that needs to be signed off, those sorts of things. And we also need to, once they've recognized the fact that this is the problem that we're going to have, or we're having right now, they need to actually have the will to be able to push us towards a future state. We all know that for a long time the transition to STTM was held off until the point at which the FDA said you have to do it. So then suddenly everybody was moving towards that. I think certainly, this is obviously my opinion, I think the carrot doesn't work. The stick is going to have to work for this. And just as an update, we're going to be publishing like a response to the paper, just to clarify some of our findings, and sort of more formalize what was represented from the project, I think. So with that, I will hand it over to, oops. To Maria, was it?
Yes.
Great.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the non-clinical projects update, highlighting the data consistency between SEND datasets and the study report project. Ours will be a bit of an unconventional presentation, as you are about to overhear a conversation between two fictional employees of the Fuse Pharmaceutical Company. One employee is a veteran of the company and very knowledgeable of the standard for the exchange of non-clinical data, otherwise known as SEND. The other is a new hire and has just run her first set of SEND datasets for a study that will be submitted to the FDA as part of an IND. Hi, Lindsay. I'm working on my first set of SEND datasets that will be included in an IND filing this year.
That's so exciting, Maria. How is it going?
Well, I've generated the datasets, made sure we followed the required controlled terminology, ran it against the validator, and I'm sure it will pass the technical conformance requirements. Then I obtained the final study report, and I'm now comparing the datasets to the report, and I'm finding differences. How is this possible when we use the same LIMS system to collect our toxicology data?
Well, this is a common industry problem, Maria. Remember, we have one tool that generates our study reports from our LIMS systems and another that generates our SEND datasets. Just by using two different tools that behave differently, we can expect there to be differences. What differences exactly are you seeing?
Well, my datasets include pretest weights collected on the subjects of the study, but these weights are not in the study report. Is this a problem?
A good rule of thumb is to consider whether or not the data inconsistency could lead to differences in interpretations or conclusions of the study. Here's a reference that you might find useful. It's on the FUSE webpage, and it is the wiki of a FUSE project team, data consistency, SEND datasets, and study reports. Based on their experience, the team came up with a list of identified discrepancies between SEND datasets and study reports and categorized them by impact. Low impact discrepancies are expected to have minimal effect on study data interpretation and conclusions. High impact discrepancies could lead to misinterpretation of conclusions drawn from reviews of SEND datasets and those presented in study reports. There is a link to the team's wiki. Think of it as an interactive wiki, a place where data discrepancies can be shared for others in the community to consider when generating their own data sets for SEND. We can see that the example you described is one already listed.
I can understand that having pretest data in my SEND dataset, but not in my study report, should not lead to a reviewer to differing interpretations between the two data outputs. So is this a case of no harm, no foul, and I can just proceed?
Well, not exactly. You can see further in the interactive wiki page that the recommendation is that regardless of the lack of impact to interpretation, the discrepancies should still be called out in the NSDRG. There is a place in the NSDRG template where you can list your data discrepancies.
Oh, I see another discrepancy listed in the table that I observed between my SEND datasets and the study report. In my SEND-BG domain, the values for body weight gain are reported from scheduled body weight collection to scheduled body weight collection. But in our study report, we have some custom intervals displayed, like the difference of body weight from the beginning to the end of dosing and the difference in body weight from the beginning to the end of the recovery period.
Yes. Another advantage to sharing discrepancies as they are uncovered is the data discrepancy team can propose discussion among vendors or changes to standards to reconcile some of the differences that we are seeing. You can see in the Outstanding Issues section discussion around some discrepancies, including the one you just described. This allows forums like FUSE to have a conversation with the agency and perhaps influence future standards.
So what if I find a discrepancy that's not already listed? And why do you keep calling this an interactive wiki?
Maria, those are both very good questions. The Data Consistency, SEND Datasets, and Study Reports Wiki is set up to allow members of the FUSE community the ability to add discrepancies as they are discovered. I can show you how to do that. Since you are new to the user community, you will need to set up an account to edit this wiki. Go to the Teams Projects page, click the Create Account tab at the top right of the page. Fill in the requested information, and then click the Login tab up on the upper right-hand corner. Then log into the Fuse wiki. This is what allows you to edit. After logging into the Fuse wiki, click the Edit tab on the Data Discrepancy, Send Datasets, and Study Report wiki page. Now, navigate to the bottom of the table where you would like to add your example of a discrepancy and copy the format provided and follow the prompt. Remember, wiki syntax must be followed for the entry to display correctly. Just copy and paste what is provided and update with your example. Once you are satisfied with your entry, click the Save Changes button at the bottom of the page. The team meets monthly to review new entries and update the wiki content accordingly. Also, you might be interested to know that there is a team looking at improving the wiki format, perhaps making this even easier to do. If you attend the Fuse CSS next year, you will hear about the progress all of the teams are making, as well as meet a lot more folks that are familiar with Send.
Thanks, Lindsay. This has been very helpful, and I'll be sure to attend the Fuse CSC next year. Well, we hope this has been a non-conventional but fun way for you to hear about the progress of our team, as well as to invite you to contribute to the interactive wiki with your examples of data discrepancies. Thank you for listening, or listening in, as it were. Now I'll turn it over to Scott to hand over to our next presenter if they're ready.
So let me just turn this over to Todd or Vincent. Which one of you is actually going to drive the presentation?
Scott, and I'm going to present.
Okay, perfect. Let me just make you the presenter.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yep, if you want to put it in the presentation mode, that would be perfect.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Let's get started. My name is Vincent. I'm Todd and myself are the co-leads for this new project, industry experience submitting standardized study data to regulatory authorities. We just want to utilize the next few minutes to give everybody a project update on what's happened and what's going on and what are we planning to do. Let me get started, and then Todd can add on some things that he would like to say. The purpose of the objective of the project is basically we would like to share the submission experience. It could be like submission strategy planning, how are we going to interact with the regulators, and do we want to do a test submission, and how to seek the feedback from the health authorities. That's one thing. The second is things that we would like to explore some best practice to engage with the health authorities. The third one is we would like to also examine some different communication use cases, and to ensure that make some recommendations, and to ensure that we have the effective exchange of information. So that's the project overview. What's happened so far is the project was approved and formed in January, and we had a kickoff meeting in February, when we have colleagues and Scott and a couple of more people join us to really get the project started. And then in March, we at the Fuse CSS in Washington, D.C., and we had a breakout session to really brainstorm the any interest in the topics that we would like to further explore during the project. And we had a great participation during the breakout. We've collected a lot of ideas. And then afterwards, we also had some discussion with the other CSS projects to try, because we understand that there could be some overlapping between this project and the other projects, and such as the SDDM implementation, the group projects, and we would like to minimize the overlapping between this project and the other projects. And last month we had the first the group meeting. We are going to have we are scheduling like monthly group meeting throughout the year, and then we had the first one in April. Overall, we have 40 members signed up to participate in this project. And in terms of what we would like to achieve throughout of the course of the project, we feel that there's two deliverables that we can make. One is that we feel that maybe a forum could be a very good place for us to conduct some informal and a quick exchange of the information, and by using that, we would like to share the knowledge and experience and ideas related to the submitting standardized data. We would encourage members to discuss the issues and challenges, and also could have members to recommend some of the solutions, so that the people can think about it and take back to their project to see whether that fits into their project or not. The forum has gone live already on the wiki page of the project, and there's a link embedded in the presentation that we can use to go to that page. Second deliverable that we are planning to do is actually, in addition to the informal discussion, we would like to conduct some in-depth investigation and assessment around some selected topics. And in the end, we would like to, based on the investigation, the assessment, we would like to produce a more formal a paper, formal good practice document. These are the topics that we identified so far, and we will discuss them more, and the plan is that we probably will split into some subgroups, and then each subgroup will be working on one topic based on the interests of the members. As a highlight, the four things that we would like to, four topics that we would like to cover. One is that there are differences in the requirement between the health authorities. And then we would like to further explore the communication with the health authorities on what exactly we would like. I mean, we have some guidance available, and we will try to better understand the guidance, and then to put together some really some process in reality, and what should be the process, and how we should coordinate, collaborate between the line functions within the sponsor company. And the third one is we've got some interest, some members asking, okay, when really we decide that we are going to have a submission, what is the to-do list for us to prepare? And the fourth one is really we're trying to look into the process to ensure that we have a very solid, a very comprehensive submission strategy and planning at the early stage, such as how are we going to utilize the SDSP, and then how we are going to handle the version upgrading, and how are we going to handle the legacy studies from the submission and the communications perspective. And that's the second deliverable. If any members who would like to join the project, you can reach out to Todd, to myself, or to Wendy. Yeah, and Todd, would you like to add anything to this presentation? Todd, are you there?
Hi, Vincent. I'm not sure that Todd's audio is working, so I don't think he's able to comment.
Okay, so Jen, shall I just hand it over to
You
Lindsay?
can hand it back to me,
Because
Vincent. We have a few questions and a comment. So the first question for Jeff Lowe. Can you, Jeff, just clarify that is the project team suggesting that the SAS version 8 transport format be used as an interim solution under the guise of that we have to do something now?
So that was the recommendation in the paper was based on the fact that we just didn't have enough support from the industry to really take on a lot of the ideas. The ideas themselves that were quite popular, obviously, the ones that are around the sort of the formalization, wider fields and everything like that weren't particularly interesting to people. I mean, this is my personal opinion. I think it would be a waste of time. I think what we should be doing is we should be sort of looking more at what the data what the data discussion is going to be like in the future, and moving towards the ability for us to be able to move data around in a way that's reflective of the data, the type of data we're going to be getting in the future. The paper itself, I really strongly recommend you take a look at it. There are a lot of really interesting ideas that came up as part of that, and a lot of things that would really add value. I think the ability to see impartial data sets and have them self-describing, I think that's a massive win for us. So we don't have to actually move everything around at all times.
I appreciate that. I think that, again, to kind of echo Jeff's point, I would encourage people to, look at that alternative transport white paper. If you have questions or comments or feedback, please feel free to reach out to us at Fuse. We're always sort of welcome to hear opinions from our colleagues. Whether you're in industry or a regulatory agency, I think it's again a good opportunity to have your voice heard to improve the way that clinical research data science and regulatory data science is conducted. We did have one comment for Maria and Lindsay. They thought the presentation was excellent. They really, a couple of people really thought the way that was presented resonated with them. So, I think if we kind of look to that, for those of us that will be giving presentations in the webinars in the future, I think that type of presentation seemed to resonate and work very well. It looks like Todd does have a comment. Todd, if you want to go ahead and add some additional color to what Vincent had said. Maybe.
Hi, I think there is a problem with Todd's audio because it's still not coming through.
Audio. Okay, well, that's fair. Well, it looks like we don't have.
No.
It looks like we don't have any other questions. So I just want to thank people for their time today, and we'll look forward to seeing you on another webinar, or if you're at the US Connect or the Frankfurt Connect, we'll look forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.